This painting took about 2 hours to complete, and in this video you will see exactly how it came together start to finish, from the first rough sketch all the way to the final touches. My name is Victor, I work as a concept artist, so let's dive in. How to even start a digital painting like this? So before anything, before putting down a single line, I start looking for reference images. That's your foundation, and I know it sounds basic, but it's incredibly important, and I'll usually repeat it time to time in some of the videos, because it really does make a difference. This time I wanted to paint something that felt a little bit like a fantasy, swamp, mysterious, so I pulled up some images of lizards, Komodo dragons and other reptiles. Plus I looked at swampy environments, foggy trees, tangled roots, water reflections, things like that. You don't need to copy what you see, but having visual references helps, guide your composition. All sorts of design choices along the way. When you start sketching, you're not just drawing, you're deciding where the focus goes, what's your focal point, where do you want the viewer's eye to land first, what's the story of your scene. These are important things to think about, especially when you're planning your composition. In this painting I sketched out like a large lizard mount with a rider, and I kept adjusting the pose and the scale until it felt like it worked naturally in the composition. You can have a rough sketch, it doesn't have to be polished, it doesn't have to be perfect, and that's completely okay as long as you understand what's going on in it, and that's enough to move forward. Once the sketch feels solid, you can start thinking about the mood and the lighting. This is when the painting really starts to take shape. For this one, I imagined a warm, hazy environment like a swamp under a late afternoon sun, something like that. Right from the beginning, you can try to nail down the background lighting because it sort of sets the stage for everything else. And here are a few things that sometimes get overlooked. Foreground trees or dark elements near the edge of your canvas usually act like a frame. They help to lead the viewer's eye to the center, towards your focal point, whatever it might be. So I added, in this case, darker trees in the foreground to guide the viewer toward the rider and the lizard. Now you should start thinking about values. Use flat color to block in your shapes, but try to do it strategically. Make sure your main character stands out clearly from the background. If your values are too similar and not grouped correctly, things get muddy and hard to read. Here's a quick trick. Try to squint your eyes or zoom out, like make the image really small, and try to see what's going on, if your values are working and if everything is still readable. Alright, so now you have a basic color blocking, a rough mood, and a composition starting to form. What's next? Well, then let's try to figure out the background design a bit more. I added some foliage using a warm green hue, nothing too detailed yet, just some interesting shapes indicating something interesting. The goal is to frame the character even more and build a believable environment around him. As you keep working, don't be afraid to adjust your values, push the darks, leave the lights, shift the colors around a little bit. Nothing is set in stone for now, so you still have lots of room to improve the image, to make it look better if you decide so. It's all about finding a balance and making sure that every part of the image feels connected. So at this point, everything still looks a little flat, and that's completely okay. It just means that you haven't fully pushed the form yet. Now is when you start describing volume a bit more. Start by deciding where the light is coming from. I imagine a top-down light, something diffused, cutting across the lizard and casting shadows beneath the roots and under the creature's body. You can start to place those shadows with a hard edge even, and then soften them to describe the form more accurately. Ask yourself, where are the soft transitions? Where do you need sharper contrast? Because you're building the illusion of 3D form on a flat canvas. Once I started adding those shadows, the form began to pop, but the background still wasn't working for me. It felt a little bit too cluttered, so you can take a step back, maybe simplify it a bit, maybe lighten the background, move a few tree shapes around. You'll notice that just by changing the background values, making it flatter or adding more depth, some tree placement can completely change how your focal point reads. I wanted the lizard's head and the rider to be more visible. You also might want the whole thing to feel like a dense, humid jungle, so I picked up a large brush and started making bigger changes. For now, don't worry about the details, just try to place bolder decisions on your canvas. I moved the trees, adjusted the light levels a little bit, removed some shapes, added new ones, all in the service of one goal, improving the composition. Think of this part like shaping and designing the scene. Alright, so after we've improved a little bit the background, we can go back to the grass, darken it in places to suggest depth and perspective. Don't want to have just a flat green. Try mixing hues, warmer lights, cooler shadows, more desaturated, things like that. I used a more desaturated green, leaning slightly toward blue in the shadow areas. You can keep things subtle, but color variation adds lots of life. A little bit of attention to the water. I had this idea that the lizard was emerging from a swampy pool. Not a major focal point, but it sort of helps set the scene. You can try painting it loosely, some reflections, some hits of wetness, but don't overdo it. Let's make sure that the attention is on the lizard mount. Time to circle back and refine the creature itself, add more depth to the shadows around the eyes, neck, the mouth. Think about all the objects on its back, bags, armor, straps, they all cast shadows too. And this is a perfect moment to pull up your reference images again. Even if the creature is sort of fantasy, it should still be believable. That's where the good reference images that you gathered come in. Also think about what colors you want to use for the character's costume. What about the bags, the gear, the saddle? Make those choices now. You can show a little bit of personality through those colors. And I continued to define the lizard's head, adding some textures to suggest the scales. Here's like an important tip. You don't have to render every scale, you just have to imply it. You can use a texture brush, showing some variation, and your viewer's brain will fill in the rest. Same goes for straps, harnesses, all those tiny accessories. Imply the structure with a little bit of form and shadow, then move to the rider. So now this part is really important because I'm gonna work a little bit on the halftones. I will use a texture brush to describe this part, and I will also think about the form a little bit better and maybe add additional information to show how things overlap and connect within each other. Also, it's quite important to work on the character on top of our lizard mount, add some shadows area, describe a little bit the face, not too much because it's really tiny, so from this distance we don't have to put too much details in it, and then add some additional details, harnesses, straps, and things that will complete the design of our character and the lizard mount. Of course, you can map out where the shadows fall on her clothing and hood. Just a few marks in the right places can make her feel grounded in the scene. Add a few highlights carefully on the face, the cape, maybe even the gear. And next up, a little bit of background polish. Earlier I hinted at the giant tree root curling behind the characters. Now it's time to flesh that out a little bit more, but just remember, don't overdo it. The background shouldn't compete with your focal point, so keep the contrast low, use texture brushes, soft transitions, suggest form, but don't demand too much attention. You can start back there and then work your way forward again. And now finally you can address areas that are hit directly by the light. These are the planes facing up, the top of the lizard's back, the rider's hood, maybe a few patches on the ground. Just keep it subtle. The lighting in this scene is mostly diffuse, so don't blow it out completely with high contrast. So now we reached the really fun part where you can play with the adjustment layers, shift the colors slightly, try warming things up, adding some saturation or pushing things cooler for contrast. It's very easy to experiment while you're painting digitally. Sometimes I can try and experiment with a cooler tone in the background just to separate it more from our subject. You can also test out some fog or mist, especially in a swampy, humid environment. It adds depth and helps unify the image. And also now it's a good time to zoom out, look at the image in a small format. You can ask yourself, does anything feel out of place? Is something too sharp, maybe too bright? Fix those things now. Maybe some parts need more detail, others less. It's all about balance. You can keep refining forever, honestly, but give yourself a limit. This took me about 2 hours in total. I could have spent another hour or 2 hours adding more details and spelling out some things even better, but I think where it landed is solid for now. Alright, let's take a look at the final painting. I tried to keep variations subtle but intentional in some parts. Also, edge control plays a big role here. Some edges are soft, others are lost entirely. That helps your composition breathe in a way, sort of keeps the viewer's focus where you want it. Alright, that's it for this one. I hope you picked some useful tips. If you enjoyed this breakdown, let me know in the comments. Feel free to subscribe, drop a like, it helps a lot. Thanks again for watching till the end, and I'll catch you in the next one.